The cold October rays shone through the shabby curtains in the living room of my house on the east side of Evanston. I sat at a table littered with old maps and archival documents, trying to make sense of the half-erased records of our neighborhood's early 20th century development. My age-stained fingers gingerly turned the fragile pages. It had been my daily occupation since I retired from Evanston North High School, where I had worked as a geography teacher for nearly 4 decades. My name is Webster Naip. I'm 68 years old, and I'm in my 3rd year of living alone in this 2-story house with peeling paint and creaky floorboards. My wife Beatrice died of lung cancer, and since then the world has been divided into a before and an after. At first I thought I wouldn't survive the loss. 39 years together is no joke, but one gets used to everything, even emptiness and silence. The phone vibrated somewhere among the papers. Beatrice always laughed at my disorganization, said I was drowning in my research like a swamp. I pulled the papers apart and saw a message from Cassidy, my grandson's wife. My only grandson, Bristow, had married her 3 years ago, shortly after Beatrice's death. I still remember the awkwardness at their wedding, as if my grief was out of place amidst everyone's merriment. I opened the message and froze. "We've decided you're not invited to the family dinner." I reread it again, then another. No explanation, no extenuating circumstances, just a dry notice of exclusion. Family dinner had been a tradition of ours since Bristow was little. Once a month we got together. Even when he was away at college, we tried to make time. After we got married, that tradition continued, though the atmosphere wasn't as warm anymore. I put my phone aside and walked to the window. Across the street, in the park, a young mother was rocking her baby on a swing. A nagging pain spread somewhere in my chest, and it wasn't my aching heart. I could have called Bristow, demanded an explanation. I could write an angry response to Cassidy. But what difference would it make? If you're made to feel unwelcome, imposing is only adding to the humiliation. Cassidy never made it a secret that she thought I was a burden. Reservedly polite smiles, detached questions about my health, condescending nods when I talked about my research. "How interesting, Webster, that you're still doing this at your age," she'd say in the tone she used to praise children for meaningless scribbles. Now even that ostensible politeness was gone. Bristow, he's more complicated. We were close once. He was a curious child, pestering me with questions about different countries and peoples, listening with delight to stories of my few travels. In his nursery room hung a huge map of the world that we had bought together. Every time I visited, he would show me new countries he had learned about. Then there was teenage rebellion, college, growing up. But even then we found common ground. He went into environmental engineering, and we often discussed how geography affects ecosystems. When Beatrice died, Bristow was there for me. For the first few months he came by often, checking up on me to see how I was doing. And then Cassidy showed up. I remember the first time we met, she looked at my house and I could almost physically feel her disappointment. She must have hoped that her future husband's grandfather would be a wealthy man with a large inheritance. Instead, she saw a modest house with shabby furniture and an old man engrossed in what she thought were useless stories. Cassidy worked as a call center operator for an insurance company, but always referred to herself as an insurance communications specialist. She was ambitious and practical to the core. Only things that had a concrete benefit and preferably financial mattered to her. My stories about how neighborhood boundaries had changed over the last century were almost physically repulsive to her. Gradually, I began to notice that Bristow was adopting her views. He was less and less interested in my research and more impatient. "Grandfather, we don't have much time. Let's get to the point." He no longer lingered after dinners to talk privately as he used to. If I started talking about new findings in the archives, he smiled politely, but his gaze wandered, searching for an escape route. I returned to the desk and looked at the message again. "We've decided Not Cassidy has decided, but we have. So Bristow had been a part of that decision too. That thought was particularly painful. My own grandson, who I'd taught to ride a bike, who I'd helped with homework, who I'd given my old mineral collection to, now decided I wasn't worthy of a seat at their table. Why? I went over our recent encounters in my mind. A month ago at dinner, I'd talked about some old photos of Evanston I'd found in the archives. Cassidy yawned defiantly, and Bristow glanced nervously at his watch. Maybe I'd been too intrusive, but I was just sharing what I was interested in, like all people do. Hadn't I listened with interest to Cassidy talk about her work, even though, frankly, I had little interest in the new insurance offerings for young families? I poured myself some tea and slowly lowered myself into the old chair by the fireplace, which I hadn't lit since last winter. I threw the blanket that Beatrice had knitted before Bristow was born over my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt my age so keenly. An old, unwanted man with outdated interests and habits, so they can see me. Apparently, yes. I glanced at my phone again, thinking about how to reply. I could write something like, "It's okay, I understand," lie, swallow my resentment. You could ask for an explanation. I could express my disappointment. I imagined Cassidy showing my response to Bristow, them discussing it, maybe even chuckling. Poor Grandpa, offended like a child. I put the phone away, still not answering. The tea was getting cold and it was starting to get dark outside the window. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a feeling was rising that I hadn't felt in a long time. Not resentment, no. Something deeper and stronger. Determination. They'd decided I wasn't invited to the family dinner. That's fine. I accept that decision. But they're wrong if they think I'll just resign myself to continuing to play the role of the forgotten old man who is only remembered out of politeness. 7 days. I'll give myself 7 days to prepare. And then they'll see that old Webster Knipe hasn't written himself off yet. I won't have a scandal or a dramatic showdown. No. I'll give them a surprise that will make them reconsider their attitude toward me. I got up from my chair and went to the bookcase where I kept my most valuable archival finds. Among them were materials that could prove extremely useful to Bristow's environmental project. I had been following his work through publications in the local newspaper and knew that he was facing challenges. I also remembered a recent conversation when Cassidy mentioned a possible promotion. All of this could be leveraged. Let them think they've gotten rid of the annoying old man with his boring stories. I'll show them that my experience and knowledge have real value, even if they don't realize it. And when they realize their mistake, it will be too late to restore the relationship on previous terms. I smiled at my thoughts and felt a surge of energy for the first time in a day. Old age has its advantages. You are no longer afraid of losing something that is gradually going away. There were 7 days ahead of me, and I intended to make the most of them. The morning began with the usual routine. I woke up at 6 o'clock, as I had done for the past 40 years, even when I didn't have to rush to school for lessons. Old habits cling to us tighter than young memories. I took my blood pressure pills, put the kettle on, did some simple joint exercises. Through the kitchen window, I watched a neighbor boy delivering newspapers, a job that would soon disappear like so many other things from my youth. After breakfast, I sat in a chair with a notepad. Yesterday's message from Cassidy was still echoing in a muffled ache somewhere inside, but now that ache was joined by determination. I decided to analyze the situation the way I used to do when I was studying for class, consistently and methodically. When exactly did things start to change? I guess the first warning bells had sounded when I'd first met Cassidy. Bristow had brought her to meet me and Beatrice a few months before she died. Cassidy was polite, smiled in all the right places, asked the right questions. But behind that politeness, I sensed an evaluating look, as if she were assessing how my wife and I fit into her plans for the future. After Beatrice's death, that detachment became more noticeable. At the wake, Cassidy sat next to me, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, Webster, we'll take care of you." Her voice sounded not concerned, but condescending. It was as if I were not a man who had lost his beloved wife, but a burden that they generously agreed to carry. And then came the small but regular injections. One day, I brought old photographs of Evanston to a family dinner to show what their neighborhood looked like in the 30s. "Webster, you have such peculiar interests," Cassidy said then, stretching her words unnaturally. "Most people your age are into golf or fishing, and you're still digging through old papers." "They're not just papers," I countered. "It's the history of our town, living and tangible. Look, Bristow, this is where they're building the new shopping center. There used to be a great park with a—" "Grandpa," Bristow interrupted me. "We're a little late for the movie. Maybe another time?" There was no next time. When I tried to talk about the history of the neighborhood again, Cassidy would yawn or find something urgent to do in the kitchen. Gradually, I stopped bringing pictures and maps, and table talk was reduced to discussing the weather and health. There was also the case of my old vinyl record player. I loved listening to 50s jazz, especially on rainy evenings. Cassidy and Bristow walked in unannounced when Dave Brubeck was playing. "Jesus, Webster, are you still using that dinosaur?" Cassidy twiddled her thumb at the turntable. "There's these, what do you call them? Streaming services. Bristow can set you up." "I like that sound," I said. "There's a warmth to it that digital recordings don't have." "It's called distortion and noise," she laughed. "Digital sound is cleaner and better, isn't it, darling?" Bristow nodded, avoiding my gaze. Once we'd listened to these records together, and he'd asked me about the musicians, about the era when this music was made. Now he stood next to his wife, confirming that my predilections were outdated and ridiculous. There were other times when Cassidy made it clear that she considered me a relic of the past. My habit of jotting down important matters in a paper agenda rather than on my phone. My reluctance to use food delivery services, preferring to cook myself or go to trusted cafes. My inability to use social media, except for the most basic functions. All of these things were cause for condescending smiles and comments like, "Webster, you're so charmingly old-fashioned." I drew a timeline in my notebook marking key moments in the deterioration of our relationship. The first year after Bristow and Cassidy's wedding, monthly dinners, formal but regular. Second year, meetings become less frequent, my calls increasingly unanswered. "Sorry, Grandpa, we're really busy." Year 3, Cassidy stops hiding her irritation, and Bristow grows more distant. What happened to my grandson? Where did that inquisitive boy who could spend hours listening to me talk about different countries and peoples go? Who would bring me his school projects to check geography facts? Who called from college to discuss a book he had just read? Cassidy undoubtedly played a role in our estrangement, but to blame her alone would be too easy. Bristow is an adult making his own choices. If he let her dictate the terms of their relationship with me, then our connection meant less to him than I thought. Perhaps I myself had unwittingly contributed to this estrangement. After Beatrice's death, I withdrew into my research as if archival documents could replace live communication. Maybe I became too obsessive with my stories. Maybe I didn't show enough interest in their lives. No, I dismissed that possibility at once. I always asked about Bristow's work, his projects. I was always interested in Cassidy's success at the insurance company, even though it was frankly boring to me. I sent them holiday cards, called them on their birthdays. For the past 2 years, I'd even mastered video calling to be up to date. No, it wasn't a lack of effort on my part. I went out into the garden, which needed tending, and sat down on the bench I had made with Father Bristow, my son Peter, many years ago. Peter died in a car accident when Bristow was only 5 years old. Perhaps that's why I became so attached to my grandson, seeing him as an extension of my son. And maybe that's why Bristow's estrangement hurt especially deeply. In my jacket pocket, I fumbled for the old folding knife I always carried, another habit Cassidy had teased me about. "Webster, why do you need a knife? Are you going to stab someone?" she asked with a laugh. I tried to explain that to a man of my generation. A knife was a common tool, always useful in the household, but she only rolled her eyes. I unfolded the knife and began cutting dry branches from a nearby bush. The work helped me think. What do I know about Bristow and Cassidy's current lives? From our infrequent conversations and the local newspaper, I knew that Bristow was working on a wetland restoration project along Lake Michigan. An important project, but one that faces bureaucratic hurdles and a lack of historical data on landscape change. That's the kind of data I've been collecting over the last few years in the archives. I knew less about Cassidy. She had been working at Lakeshore Insurance for 5 years and had recently mentioned a possible promotion. To do so, she had to present some innovative plan to grow the department. She talked about it in passing, clearly not considering me capable of understanding or appreciating such modern business stuff. But what if I could help them both? Use my knowledge and experience to support their career aspirations. Not for the sake of repairing the relationship, that hope seems irretrievably lost, but to show them how wrong they were to think I was a useless relic of the past. I went back into the house and pulled from the top shelf a thick folder labeled Evanston's Coastal Areas, 19th and 20th Centuries. There were copies of old maps, photographs, newspaper notes, engineers' reports, anything that could shed light on the environmental changes of the area. These materials could greatly assist Bristow's project, saving him weeks, if not months, of research. Then I sat down at the computer. Contrary to Cassidy's perception, I was perfectly capable of handling modern technology. I just didn't see the need to use it for everything. I opened Lakeshore Insurance's website and began to peruse their latest press releases, annual reports, and business publications. Gradually, I developed a picture of the direction the company was going and what innovations might interest its leadership. 25 years of teaching taught me how to structure information and present it in an accessible way. I could use those skills to help Cassidy develop an impressive business plan. Not for her gratitude, I had no illusions about that, but to see the look on her face when the useless old man provided her with something that could significantly advance her career. I worked until late afternoon, taking notes and sketching out a plan of action. For the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of energy and purpose. It was like preparing for an important class, only the stakes were much higher. Near midnight, I went to the kitchen for tea and noticed the blinking light on my phone. Bristow sent a text. "Grandpa, are you okay? You didn't answer Cassidy." I grinned. So my silence bothered them. They were expecting an aggrieved response or a pathetic request to reconsider. My dignity didn't fit their script. I didn't answer. Let them suffer the unknown a little longer. My surprise would be all the more effective the less they suspected it. The next morning, I went to the Evanston City Library. My former student Eileen Trent, who had become head librarian, worked there. She always enjoyed my visits and helped with access to rare materials. "Mr. Knife," she exclaimed when she saw me. "What a pleasant surprise. What brings you here today?" "Hello, Eileen. I need your help with some research. It's, a personal project." I explained that I needed additional material on coastal ecology and current trends in the insurance business. Eileen didn't ask too many questions, for which I was grateful. "We've just digitized the city's engineering department archives from 1910 to 1970, she said. "I think you'll find a lot of interesting things in there for your project." I spent the next few hours at the computer in the library, studying the materials and making notes. By evening, I had an impressive collection of data that could significantly help the Bristow project. I also found interesting research on the application of historical analysis to the insurance industry, an area that could be the basis for Cassidy's innovative plan. Returning home, I reflected on my plan. Wasn't there an element of petty revenge in it? Maybe. But more importantly, I wanted to show them that they were wrong to think of me as an outmoded old man with no useful skills or knowledge. I wanted them to realize that by excluding me from their lives, they had lost not only a relative, but also a valuable ally. At home, another message from Bristow was waiting for me. "Grandpa, please call. We're worried." Again, I left it unanswered. Their concern was belated and insincere. If they really cared about my feelings, they wouldn't have sent that first message. I spent the next few days preparing my surprise. I organized the information I had gathered, prepared presentation materials, and drew up detailed plans, both for Bristow's environmental project and Cassidy's business strategy. I used all my teaching skills to make these materials as clear and compelling as possible. At the same time, I ignored the growing flood of messages and calls from Bristow and Cassidy. "Grandpa, you're scaring us. Webster, if you're offended, let's discuss it. We'll stop by to see if everything is okay." I didn't respond, enjoying their confusion. They were used to me always being available, always willing to accept any terms, just to maintain the appearance of a family relationship. Now I was changing the rules of the game. On the 6th day, I finalized my materials and made a plan for the visit. I wanted to take them by surprise by showing up unannounced. The element of surprise was an important part of my plan. In the evening, I sat in my chair, rereading my notes and thinking about the upcoming meeting. Tomorrow they would see how wrong they were to think I was a useless old man with outdated views. Tomorrow, I would show them that Webster Naif was still capable of teaching them a lesson they would not soon forget. On the 7th day, I got up earlier than usual. I drank coffee, organized all the materials I had prepared into 2 neat folders, and put them in the old leather briefcase I had carried to class for the last 15 years of teaching. He looked at himself in the mirror, his face carefully shaved, his eyes suddenly clear and determined. I put on my best tweed jacket, old-fashioned, as Cassidy would say, but quality and representative. I'd spent the last 6 days gathering information and preparing my surprise. I called my longtime buddy Norman Hicks, a professor of ecology at Northwestern University, to find out more about the Bristow Project. "The coastal revitalization project is facing a serious problem," Norman explained to me. "They need historical data on the coastal strip from the 1890s to the 1960s. Without that data, they can't move forward and risk losing funding." This was exactly the kind of information I had been collecting for years. My archives held copies of old maps, photographs, engineers' reports, newspaper clippings, anything that documented the changes in Evanston's coastal ecosystem over the last century and a half. I spent 2 days organizing these materials, preparing them in a format that would be most useful to the Bristow Project. I added my comments pointing out key changes and trends that may have escaped the attention of young professionals unfamiliar with the historical context. In parallel, I researched the situation of Cassidy's work. Here, I was helped by another former student, Doris Palmer, who was now working in the insurance industry. Through her, I learned that there was indeed a job opening at Lakeshore Insurance where Cassidy worked for a customer service manager. "It will go to the person who comes up with the most innovative plan to modernize the customer experience," Doris told me. "But there is a lot of competition, about 10 candidates." I spent the next 3 days developing a business plan that could help Cassidy stand out from the other applicants. I used my teaching experience to analyze how the principles of effective teaching could be applied to customer service. I studied the latest trends in insurance, innovative approaches to customer service in other industries, and research on consumer psychology. The result was a 20-page document with a clear structure, illustrative diagrams, and specific suggestions for reorganizing the department's work. The plan included the creation of a tiered training system for new employees, the introduction of a personalized approach to customers based on an analysis of their preferences, and an innovative loyalty program. I was confident that this plan could give Cassidy a serious advantage over the other candidates. Not because I was a business genius, but because I applied a systematic approach and years of experience to a specific problem, something I always taught my students. Now, on the 7th day, everything was ready. I left the house, walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, and got on the route to the north side of Evanston where Bristow and Cassidy lived. They'd bought a small house there a year ago, and I'd only been to their house twice, for a housewarming party and Christmas. On the bus, I went over my speech in my mind. I didn't want to seem offended or vindictive. My goal was not to make them feel guilty, but to show them how wrong they were to think I was a useless old man with outdated knowledge. I wanted them to see that by removing me from family affairs, they had lost not just a relative, but someone whose experience and knowledge could be of real value to them. Bristow and Cassidy's house was typical of the neighborhood, small but neat, with a tiny manicured garden. I walked up on the porch and rang the doorbell, feeling my heart beat more than usual. Cassidy opened the door and I saw her face change from surprise to confusion and then to poorly concealed irritation. "Webster!" she exclaimed with false joy. "What a surprise! We were so worried when you didn't respond to messages." "Hello, Cassidy," I replied calmly. "May I come in? I have something important for you and Bristow." She reluctantly stepped back, letting me into the house. In the living room, Bristow was sitting on the couch with a laptop on his lap. When he saw me, he jumped up. "Grandpa, are you okay? We were just about to go to your place." "I'm fine, Bristow," I said as I came into the room. "I've just been busy with a project." I noticed the quick exchange of glances between them. They clearly hadn't expected my visit and didn't know how to react. The weak silence after Cassidy's message had thrown them off. They were used to me always being predictable, always meeting their expectations. "Sit down, please," I said, pointing to the couch. "What I want to show you will take some time." They exchanged another glance and sat down next to each other on the couch. I sank into the chair across from them and opened my briefcase. "I've been doing a little research over the last week," I began, pulling out the first folder. "Bristow, I know you're working on the coastal revitalization project and that you're having trouble with the historical data on the coastal strip." Bristow straightened up, clearly surprised by my awareness. "Yes, but how did you—" "I have my sources," I smiled. "That's not what's important. What's important is that I have materials that can significantly help your project." I handed him the folder and he began to look through the contents, his eyebrows rising higher with each page turned. This is exactly what we need," he murmured, studying a map of the coastal strip from the year 1923. "Where did you get this?" "I've been collecting this stuff for years," I answered. "As I said, it's my personal interest. I've organized them specifically for your project and added comments pointing out key changes. On page 27, you'll find particularly interesting data on underwater currents that may explain the anomalous erosion in the northern sector." Bristow flipped through the pages and froze when he saw the section indicated. "Grandfather, this could save our project. We've been trying to figure out the cause of this erosion for months now." I nodded, enjoying his amazement, then pulled out a second folder and turned to Cassidy. "And this is for you, Cassidy. I know that there's an opening at Lakeshore Insurance for a customer service manager, and that you're one of the candidates." Her eyes widened with surprise. "How did you find out?" "I haven't even told Bristow yet. Like I said, I have my sources," I repeated, handing her the folder. Here you'll find a business plan for reorganizing the department based on current trends in insurance and innovative approaches to customer service. Cassidy took the folder incredulously and began leafing through the document. I could see the expression on her face change from skepticism to surprise and then to reluctant recognition of the value of the material. "This is pretty impressive," she finally said, "especially the section on personalized customer service. But why did you do it?" I leaned back in my chair, looking at them both carefully. "A week ago, I received a message that I wasn't invited to a family dinner," I said calmly. "I didn't bother to find out the reasons or make excuses. Instead, I decided to show you that you were wrong about me being a useless old man with outdated knowledge and interests." Bristow wrinkled his nose and Cassidy blushed. "Webster, we never considered you." "Please," I interrupted her, raising my hand. "Let's be honest with each other. I know how you discuss me behind my back. I know you find my interests boring and ridiculous. I know you avoid socializing with me, thinking it's a waste of time." Bristow lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. "Grandfather, I'm not blaming you," I continued. "Everyone has their own life, their own priorities. But I wanted to show you that the experience and knowledge of the older generation can have real value, that my boring research on old maps could save your project, Bristow, that my outdated teaching experience could help you get a promotion, Cassidy." A heavy silence hung in the room. Bristow continued to study the materials, his fingers reverently touching the old maps. Cassidy was turning the pages of the business plan, her face a mixture of surprise and confusion. "I don't understand," she said at last. "You did all this because of one message?" "No, Cassidy," I shook my head. "I did it because of months and years of gradual estrangement, because of the condescending smiles when I talked about my research, because of last-minute canceled meetings, because my own grandson stopped making time to communicate with me. The message was just the last straw." Bristow looked up at me, his eyes a mixture of shame and remorse. "Grandfather, I didn't realize we've been so busy. We all make choices about how we allocate our time," I said. "And those choices show us what's really important to us. I realize you have your own life. I'm not demanding that you pay more attention to me out of obligation or guilt. I just wanted to show you that by excluding me from your life, you're losing not only a relative, but also someone whose experience and knowledge could be useful to you." Cassidy closed the folder and placed it on the coffee table. "So now what?" she asked. "Do you expect us to come to you for advice on our work?" I heard a familiar note of sarcasm in her voice, but this time it didn't hurt me. I'd already accomplished my goal of showing them how wrong they'd been in their assessments. "No, Cassidy," I said calmly. "I don't expect anything. The materials I've given you are yours. Use them as you see fit." My goal was not to restore our relationship on the same terms, but to make you realize your mistake. I stood up, zipped up my empty briefcase, and headed for the door. Bristow got up as well. "Grandpa, wait. Don't leave like that. Let's talk." I stopped and turned to him. "About what, Bristow?" "About how you and Cassidy were discussing how I was too old and boring for your family dinners? About how you stopped coming to see me because your wife thinks it's a waste of time? About how you've gradually drifted away from me without even noticing it?" Bristow was silent, unable to find the words. Cassidy stood up too, her face a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment. "Webster, you're being dramatic," she said. "It was just a message that we wanted to spend the evening together. You're making too big a deal out of it." "Maybe, Cassidy," I agreed, "but that message was just the tip of the iceberg. And if you really wanted to spend the evening alone together, you could have said it differently, not as if you were excluding me from the family." I turned toward the door, feeling oddly relieved. I had said what I wanted to say, and shown them what I wanted to show them. Now I could leave with my head held high. "Thank you for the materials, Grandfather," Bristow said into my back. They're very valuable indeed. I nodded without turning around. Good luck with the project, Bristow. And to you, Cassidy, with your promotion. I walked out of the house, feeling their stares on me. The sun was already setting, painting the streets of Evanston a warm orange color. I walked to the bus stop, feeling strangely light. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had done the right thing by not staying silent and taking their disdain for granted. I didn't know if my visit would change anything about our relationship. It probably wouldn't. But I did know that I wasn't going to let them or anyone else make me feel like a useless relic of the past anymore. I was Webster Knife, a man with a wealth of experience and knowledge, and today I proved that first and foremost to myself. At home, I took off my jacket, hung it on the rack, and went into the kitchen. I made tea, sat down at the table, and only then did I feel the tension of the last few hours release me. The expressions on Bristow's and Cassidy's faces were before my eyes: shock, disbelief, confusion. It was exactly the reaction I'd been looking for, and yet something inside me remained unsatisfied. The phone rang almost as soon as I got back. It was Bristow. I thought for a moment and answered it. "Grandpa," my grandson's voice sounded excited, "Cassidy and I would like to come over and talk. May we?" "What is there to talk about, Bristow?" I asked tiredly. "I've said everything I wanted to say. Please." He sounded sincere. "We need to explain ourselves." I sighed. Part of me wanted to say no, to end this episode and move on. But the other part, the part that still remembered the little boy asking endless questions about countries and continents, couldn't just slam the door shut. "Okay," I said at last. "Come on over." They showed up 40 minutes later. I could hear their car pull up, the doors slamming, them talking quietly as they walked up to the porch. The bell rang almost hesitantly. I opened the door and silently let them into the house. Bristow looked tense. Cassidy looked annoyed, but she hid it carefully under a mask of politeness. "Come into the living room," I said. "Tea?" "Yes, thank you," Bristow said. "No, thank you," Cassidy said at the same time. I went into the kitchen, giving them time to collect their thoughts. When I returned with the tea, they were sitting on the couch with their tops still on, as if they didn't plan on staying long. "So," I began, sitting down in my chair, "you wanted to talk." Bristow leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "Grandfather, what you did today, these materials, they really are incredibly valuable. I showed some of the maps to Elizabeth, the project manager, and she's thrilled. This could not only save our project, but take it to the next level." I nodded, accepting his words. "I'm glad they were helpful," I said neutrally. "But I don't understand why you didn't tell me you had these materials before," Bristow continued. "I told you about the project, about our difficulties." "Did you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "For the last 2 years, Bristow, you've hardly spoken to me about your work, except in the most general terms. The project is moving. Lots of bureaucracy. Tired, but interesting. Not once did you ask my opinion or advice. Not once did you ask if there was anything I could do to help." Bristow lowered his eyes. "I didn't think you'd be interested in getting into technical details." "You didn't?" I repeated. "Or were you led to believe that an old geography teacher couldn't understand today's environmental problems?" Cassidy fidgeted on the couch, clearly uncomfortable under my gaze. "Webster," she interjected, "you've got it all wrong. No one thinks you're incapable or useless. It's just that everyone has their own lives, their own worries. Bristow and I work hard. We don't have a lot of free time." "We don't all have a lot of time, Cassidy," I said softly. "The question is how we choose to spend it, and your choice was clear: to minimize your contact with me." "That's not fair," she objected. "We used to invite you to dinners on a regular basis." "Until we decided I didn't deserve an invitation," I finished for her. Cassidy blushed. "It was just a misunderstanding. I was annoyed," I wrote in haste. "We were going to discuss personal matters, and I thought..." That family matters were none of my business? I asked. That I wasn't part of the family anymore. Bristow raised his hand, stopping his wife, who had already opened her mouth to object. Grandfather's right, Cassidy, he said quietly. We've really grown distant from him, and it's not just the busyness. He turned to me. I have to admit, Grandfather, that I've gradually come to see you differently. Not as someone with valuable experience and knowledge, but as an elderly relative to be cared for, but not necessarily reckoned with. His sincerity disarmed me. I expected excuses, maybe even attempts to shift blame, but not such a direct admission. Thank you for your honesty, Bristow, I said. It's painful to hear, but better the truth than a fake apology. Cassidy looked at her husband with ill-concealed irritation. Apparently, she was planning a different line of conversation. And as for the business plan, I continued, turning to her, will you need it? She pressed her lips together, clearly unwilling to recognize the value of my work. There are interesting ideas, she said reluctantly, especially about personalizing the service. But I don't understand. How did you know about the position? I didn't tell anyone. I have my sources, I smiled. It's hard to keep secrets in a small town, especially when you've lived here all your life and know half the residents. But why would you do that? She asked bluntly. Why did you have to spend so much time and effort to prove us wrong, to shame us? Not to shame us, Cassidy, I answered. It was to show you a reality you didn't want to see. I know that behind my back you've been discussing how boring and old-fashioned I am. I know you thought my interests were ridiculous and useless. I know you were glad when Bristow stopped spending time with me. Cassidy straightened, her eyes narrowing. And how do you know that? She asked defiantly. People tend to underestimate the elderly, I said. They think we don't notice glances, don't understand half sentences, don't sense changes in attitude. But the years make you more sensitive to these things, not less. I turned to Bristow. Remember Cassidy's birthday last year? You were talking in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear. Why did you invite him? She asked. He's my grandfather. How could I not invite him? You replied. But he's so boring, Bristow. All these endless stories about old maps and buildings. No one wants to listen to it. And then you went back into the living room with fake smiles. Bristow turned pale and Cassidy averted her gaze. I didn't mean to hurt you, Grandpa, Bristow muttered. Of course you didn't, I agreed. But the fact remains that you both thought of me as a burden, an unavoidable inconvenience because of the kinship. And that hurt, Bristow. It hurt more than you can imagine. There was a heavy silence in the room. Bristow stared at the floor, Cassidy nervously rubbing the sleeve of her sweater. What now? Bristow finally asked. What do we do next? That's up to you, I answered. I've shown you that my experience and knowledge still have value, that I'm not just an old man with outdated ideas about the world. Now it's up to you to decide if you want someone in your life who can be not only a relative, but a useful ally. Cassidy rose from the couch. Webster, she said, clearly choosing her words, I admit that I underestimated you. Your business plan is really impressive, and if it helps me get this position, I'd be very grateful. But could we, put the past behind us, start fresh? I looked at her for a long moment. Her words sounded conciliatory, but all I saw in her eyes was calculation. She'd assessed that I could be useful and decided to change tactics, not out of respect or remorse, but for practical reasons. You know, Cassidy, I said slowly, the past can't just be discarded. It shapes us. It shapes our relationships. And to really make a fresh start, you have to first honestly admit your mistakes. I admit I was wrong about you, she said with a note of impatience in her voice. Isn't that enough? You admit you were wrong about my usefulness, I clarified, but not in the way you treated me. There's a difference. Cassidy sighed, clearly losing patience. Webster, what do you want? An apology? Okay, I apologize for that text message. It was rude and thoughtless. It's not about the message, Cassidy. I shook my head. It's about attitude. It's about respect. It's about recognizing the value of another person, not just when they can do something for you. Bristow stood up too, putting his hand on his wife's shoulder. "Grandfather's right, Cass," he said quietly. "We did treat him wrong, and we have to admit it." Cassidy was silent, her face a struggle. Finally, she let it out. "I'm sorry we made you feel unwanted, Webster. It was wrong of us. It wasn't a sincere apology, more of a forced concession, but I've decided to accept it, at least verbally." "Thank you, Cassidy." I nodded. "I appreciate your attempt." Bristow took a step toward me. "Grandfather, I'm truly sorry. Not just about that message, but about how I let our relationship fall apart. I'd been so busy with my career, my new life with Cassidy, that I'd forgotten how important our conversations, our connection, had been. I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes, and for a moment I wanted to just hug him like old times and tell him it was okay. But I knew that wouldn't be true. Everything wasn't okay, and a simple hug couldn't make up for months and years of neglect. "I'm sorry too, Bristow," I said quietly. "I regret not saying it sooner, for letting it go on for so long. Perhaps if I'd been more forthright from the beginning, we wouldn't have gotten to this point." Bristow nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "What can we do to make things right?" he asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say, "Nothing, just leave me alone." But the other part, the part that still loved this boy-turned-man, couldn't close the door completely. "I don't know, Bristow," I answered honestly. "I'm not sure things can be fixed. Some things, once broken, can't be glued back together completely. But maybe we can build something new, something different, but something of our own." "I'd like that," he said. Cassidy stood beside him, her face impatient. I could see that she wanted this conversation to end soon, that it was too emotional and unproductive. "It's getting late," she said, looking at her watch. "We should get home. Thank you for the materials, Webster. They really are very valuable." I nodded, realizing that this conversation was primarily a business transaction for her. She'd gotten what she wanted, a plan that could help her advance her career, and now she wanted to close the subject as soon as possible. "Good day, Cassidy," I said, standing up. "I hope the plan helps you get the position." Bristow looked upset at the hasty end of the conversation, but he didn't contradict his wife. "Can I come by tomorrow?" he asked. "Talk some more? Maybe you can tell me more about those maps?" I saw Cassidy roll her eyes, though she tried to hide the movement. "Sure, Bristow," I replied. "Come by after work." I walked them to the door. Bristow hugged me goodbye, tight and sincere. Cassidy gave me a formal nod. When the door closed behind them, I went back into the living room and sank into a chair. This conversation had exhausted me more than I'd expected. It hadn't been a complete victory or a complete defeat, more like an indefinite truce. Cassidy recognized the value of my help, but was not genuinely remorseful about her attitude. Bristow looked genuinely shaken and remorseful, but could he resist his wife's influence? Would he want to? I had no illusions about a full restoration of our relationship. Too much had been said and not said. Too many resentments and disappointments had accumulated. But perhaps from the ashes of the old relationship something new could grow, more honest, more equal. I went to the window and looked out onto the street where their car had just disappeared. What would Beatrice say about today? She had always been wiser than me about family matters, able to find compromises without losing her dignity. She'd probably say, "Webster, you've taken the first step. Now give them time to make theirs." I smiled at the thought. Yes, I would give them time, but I won't allow myself to be underestimated or neglected again. No matter what happened next, I had already proven the most important thing, that Webster Naif was still capable of surprising and being useful. And that knowledge gave me strength, whatever the outcome of our complicated family relationship. It was a week after my visit to Bristow and Cassidy. As promised, My grandson stopped by the next day. We spent nearly 3 hours discussing old maps and their significance to his project. There was a genuine interest in his eyes that reminded me of the inquisitive boy I once knew. But something had changed. An invisible wall between us, erected by years of neglect and topped by my recent surprise. Bristow called almost every day after that, asking questions about the maps, sharing the project's progress. Cassidy called twice, too, dryly thanking me for the business plan and informing me that she was being considered for the department head position. Their sudden interest in talking to me was as obvious as the reason for it. Sitting in my chair with a cup of morning tea, I reflected on the situation. I could consider it a victory. They recognized the value of my experience and began to communicate more often. But deep down, I knew that their new attitude toward me was not based on genuine respect, but on the realization of potential benefits. I had become a resource for them, not someone they really wanted in their lives. The ringing of the phone interrupted my musings. It was Eileen Trent from the library. "Mr. Naif, good morning." Her voice sounded cheerful. "I have some interesting news for you. You remember you were interested in the archival documents on the coastal zone?" "Of course I remember," I answered. "Did you find something?" "Yes. The city archives gave us a new batch of digitized materials, including engineering reports from the 1930s. I think you'll find it interesting." "Very interesting," I agreed. "Thank you for thinking of me, Eileen." "One more thing," she continued. "Do you know about our Evanston Historical Society? We're having a meeting this Friday on how urban architecture has changed over the last century. Given your research, maybe you'd like to join us," I wondered. In recent years, I've rarely attended social events, preferring solitary research, but perhaps it was time for a change. "That sounds interesting," I said. "What time would it be?" 6 p.m. in the library conference room. Most of the participants are people with a genuine interest in the history of the city. I think you'll enjoy it. After talking to Eileen, I went to the calendar. I already had an appointment with Bristow for this Friday. He wanted to discuss new finds for his project. I hesitated for a minute, then picked up the phone and dialed my grandson's number. "Bristow, I'm going to have to cancel our Friday meeting," I said. "I have some important business to attend to." "Oh," he sounded disappointed. "Is it serious?" "No, it's just, a personal event," I replied. "Why don't we reschedule it for next week?" I felt strangely relieved to cancel the meeting. It was as if I'd taken the first step toward a new life, a life where I could decide how and with whom I wanted to spend my time, without letting my sense of duty or family ties dictate my terms. Friday night, I put on my best suit for the first time in a long time and went to the library. The conference room was full of people of all ages, from students to retirees. Eileen spotted me at the entrance and approached me with a smile. "Mr. Naif, I'm so glad you're here. Let me introduce you to some of our regular members." She led me over to a group of people discussing something at a booth with historical photographs. "Friends, I'd like you to meet Webster Knipe. He's a former geography teacher and a true Evanston history buff. Webster, this is River Paris, professor of architecture, Nancy Campbell, our city archivist, and Cordelia Shaw, a writer working on a book about the history of Illinois' coastal towns." I exchanged handshakes with all three. River, a gray-haired man about my age, immediately asked about my research. When I started talking about the coastal maps I had collected over the years, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's amazing, Webster. I've been looking for years for this kind of material for my research on the effects of coastal architecture on environmental change. We should definitely discuss this further." Cordelia, an elegant woman in her 60s, also expressed interest in my findings. "Your collection could be an important source for my book. If you don't mind, I'd like to take a look at it sometime." Over the course of the evening, I went from one group to another, participating in discussions, sharing my knowledge, and Surprisingly, learning a lot myself. No one looked at me condescendingly. No one rolled their eyes when I started talking about my research. On the contrary, people listened attentively, asked questions, argued, but always respectfully. When the official part of the meeting was over, River suggested we continue the conversation in a small cafe nearby. Cordelia and a few others from the meeting joined us. Over tea and dessert, we talked about history, architecture, ecology, anything that interested us. "Webster, you should definitely come to the next meeting," River said as we said goodbye. "We'll have a discussion about the impact of the railroad on Evanston's development. With your knowledge, you could make a valuable contribution." "I'd love to," I replied sincerely. Cordelia handed me her business card. "Give me a call when you're free. I'd appreciate the opportunity to see your collection." Returning home, I felt surprisingly elated. For the first time in a long time, I had spent an evening in the company of people who valued me not because of family ties or potential gain, but for my knowledge, my experience, for who I was. It was liberating. The next morning, I got a call from Bristow. "Grandpa, how was your evening?" he asked. "What did you do?" I wondered for a moment if I should tell him about the Historical Society. "I had a meeting at the library," I answered succinctly. "At the library?" He sounded surprised. "You didn't say you were interested in any of the events." "You never asked," I remarked. There was an awkward pause. "Grandfather, I've been meaning to ask," Bristow finally said. "Could you look at some more maps for our project? Elizabeth is excited about the materials you've provided and thinks we might be able to get some additional funding with them." That's it. The point of the call wasn't to find out how I spent the evening, it was to ask for more help. "Of course, Bristow," I said calmly, "but I'll be busy for the next few days. Maybe next week?" "Oh," he sounded disappointed. "What will you be busy with?" "I have some meetings with some new acquaintances from the Historical Society. We're discussing a joint project." "Historical Society?" he interjected. "I didn't know you were involved in such things." "A lot has changed lately, Bristow," I said. "I decided it was time to expand my social circle and find people who shared my interests. After talking to my grandson, I called Cordelia and arranged to meet her the same day. She arrived at my home in the afternoon, and we spent several hours going through my collection of maps and photographs. Her genuine enthusiasm and in-depth knowledge made the meeting truly enjoyable. "Webster, your collection is a real treasure," she said when we took a tea break. "Have you ever thought about making it available to the public? Maybe organize an exhibition or create an online archive?" I shook my head. "Honestly, no. I was collecting this material for myself, out of personal interest." "But it's too valuable to be the property of one person," she argued. "Your collection could be an important resource for researchers, students, and Evanstonians interested in the history of their city." Her words made me think. I had always viewed my hobby as something personal, even intimate. But what if she was right? What if my findings could be useful not only to me or Bristow, but to so many other people? In the weeks that followed, my life changed dramatically. I began regularly attending Historical Society meetings, participating in discussions, sharing my knowledge. Together with Rivera, we began working on a project to create an interactive map of Evanston's historical changes. Cordelia included materials from my collection in her book, listing me as co-author of the section on coastal history. Eileen suggested organizing an exhibit of my collection at the library, and I agreed. It took several weeks of preparation, but the result exceeded all expectations. The opening was attended not only by members of the Historical Society, but also by many residents, including the mayor and several city council members. It was at this exhibit that I met Celeste Hinton, a former history professor who had recently moved to Evanston. We struck up a conversation at a booth with 19th century maps and discovered many common interests. After the exhibit, we went to a coffee shop together and talked until closing time. From then on, we met regularly, for joint research, to attend lectures, or just for pleasant conversation. The relationship with Bristow and Cassidy had meanwhile taken on a new character. They still called and sometimes dropped by, but now I was often too busy to meet. Not out of revenge or resentment, but because I really had found more enjoyable and valuable ways to spend my time. Cassidy had gotten the position she wanted in her company, thanks in large part to the business plan I'd put together for her. The Bristow project was progressing well, too, receiving additional funding after submitting historical data from my collection. They were grateful for my help, but I felt that their gratitude was based on the practical benefits I had brought them rather than a genuine change of attitude towards me. One evening, about 3 months after my memorable visit to Bristow and Cassidy, they came to see me unannounced. I had just returned from a meeting with Celeste and was pleasantly tired. "Grandpa, we thought we'd stop by and check on you," Bristow said when I opened the door. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "Actually, I just got back and was going to get some rest," I answered honestly. "Back from where?" Cassidy asked curiously. "Celeste and I went to a lecture on the effects of climate change on the architecture of coastal cities," I answered. "Very informative." "Celeste?" Bristow asked. "Who's that?" I smiled. "My friend. We met at my collection exhibit at the library." Bristow and Cassidy exchanged surprised looks. "Exhibit? What exhibition?" Bristow asked. "Didn't I tell you? The library has organized an exhibition of my collection of historical maps and photographs. It will last for another 2 weeks if you want to visit." "Grandpa, why didn't you tell us anything? We would have definitely come to the opening." I shrugged my shoulders. "You were busy doing your thing and I was busy doing mine. Besides, there were a lot of people there who were really interested in Evanston's history and wouldn't just show up out of courtesy." Cassidy looked embarrassed and Bristow looked confused. "Could we come in?" he asked. "Talk for a while?" I nodded and let them into the house. They noticed the changes in the living room. New bookshelves filled with historical publications, a laptop on the table, a few photos of me with members of the Historical Society. "Your place is different," Bristow remarked. "Yeah, I thought I'd update things a little," I said. Celeste helped me pick out the bookshelves. She has great taste. We sat down and I offered them tea. The conversation was awkward. They clearly didn't know how to respond to the changes in my life, and I wasn't eager to make it easy for them. "How's your project going, Bristow?" I asked. "Good," he replied. "We've gotten additional funding, as I said, but we're still missing some historical data." "Write me a list of what you need," I said. "I'll see what I have, and if I find anything useful, I'll send it to you." "Thank you, Grandpa," he said, and I could hear a note of disappointment in his voice. In the past, I would have started looking for materials right away, putting all my business on hold. Now I was putting my own interests and plans first. "What about your new position, Cassidy?" I asked. "It's great," she replied with some strain. "The business plan you put together made a big impression on the management. I'm very grateful for your help." "I'm glad it was useful," I nodded. The conversation continued for a while, but it was obvious that there was a distance between us now. Not hostility, no, just a clear understanding that our lives were moving in different directions. As they left, Bristow lingered on the porch. "Grandpa, I'm glad you have new friends, new interests, but I'm sorry we're seeing less of each other." I looked at him with a soft smile. "You know, Bristow, sometimes you have to lose something to really appreciate it. I spent years seeking your approval, your attention, trying to fit into your life. Now I'm creating my own life, with people who appreciate me for who I am, and that's, liberating." He nodded, unable to find the words. "You will always be my grandson, and I will always love you," I added. "But I will no longer adjust my life to your expectations or schedule. If you want to be a part of my life, I'll be happy to, but on an equal footing, with mutual respect." After they left, I sat back in my chair and felt a strange calmness. 3 months ago, their exclusion of me from the family dinner seemed like a disaster, a blow to my dignity. Today, I realized that it had been one of the best things that had happened in my life, a catalyst for a change I had long overdue. I pulled out my phone and texted Celeste. "There's a lecture tomorrow at the History Museum on the impact of the Great Lakes on local culture. Would you like some company?" She replied almost immediately. "I'd love to. Then we can have dinner at that Italian restaurant I told you about." I smiled, putting the phone away. Life went on, and it was much more interesting and fulfilling than I could have imagined just a few months ago. I was no longer a lonely old man who was tolerated out of politeness. I was Webster Naip, a man with valuable experience and knowledge, a man who was respected and appreciated for who he was, and that feeling was worth all the hurt and disappointment I had endured.